All right, guys. So we're back and we're going to talk about a very important topic today. Um, this is inspired by a conversation I had with a client just the other day. And we were talking about an ex. And this is an ex in particular he was having a really hard time getting over. And just to kind of paint the picture, um, they had been on again, off again for years, but there were always problems. There was a lot of codependence in the relationship, and even though on one hand it felt like she understood him and he understood her in ways that nobody else did, it almost felt like a soulmate kind of relationship. Uh, there was also tons and tons of drama and codependence that would come up, and it was a very, very emotionally draining relationship, and which is why they broke up and eventually broke up for good. And what was really difficult for this client was that he still thought about her. And even though he's been dating other women and, he's had some good kind of relationships, this one relationship still haunted him. And this is a really common story. And I talked about in a prior video, I've talked about anima possession. And what's essentially going on here is that this ex of his was an anima sort of dynamic. Now, for those of you who don't understand it, this is essentially a woman who you would say represents some of his the unconscious feminine, and he would be her animus, which would he would represent her unconscious masculine. And the reason this is such a big draw is because this is a buried part of our psyche, and so when we connect with that other person, we feel like they get us in a way that nobody else does, and most crucially here, we feel like they see part of us that nobody else can see, and that we almost only feel like it's almost like we don't feel anybody else could possibly accept us in that way like they did. Um, it's sort of like the high. There's a lot of lows, but the high is extraordinarily, extraordinarily powerful. And so what I advised him, something I've advised other clients about too, but the reason that this relationship was so impactful was not because the girl was special. And I've often said that it was all a fantasy. And while that's true, it was a fantasy. There was all sorts of fantasizing about the other person. It's not to say that that other person didn't actually see this part of us, let's say. But what it is that we put up all these barriers to connecting in general. We had all this shame that put up a big wall among us and other women. It's part of us that, we didn't feel almost comfortable fully sharing. And this girl, she's able to accept that part of us. She's actually maybe even drawn to that part of us. And so it's so we assume that because she was able to get past these defenses, she was able to see past the various blocks that we made, that she was this incredibly special girl. Whereas the reality is that she's not, and the only reason that she's put in that position is because she was able to bypass those walls. The reason these relationships always fall apart, I've never seen an exception to this, by the way. I'm sure it exists, but I've never seen an exception to it, is because neither of the two of you have learned to really accept each other, accept yourselves. And so they become super codependent because there's immediately this obligation to the other person that, okay, well, you see me for who I am. Therefore, we have this deep love. Therefore, you have to accept all of my shame. And so both parties kind of throw their shame on the other person, which creates all sorts of drama and emotionally pulling back because people are afraid. And so it's like this constant. You wanna get super close, but then you're freaked out and you pull back, and then you feel misunderstood, but then you feel super understood, and it's just this constant, like, trying to get back to that feeling that you had at that one moment of the 2 of you being so, so, so connected. The reason it's difficult for you to feel this connection with other girls is because other girls do not necessarily bypass all of your all of your shame initially. They don't get to that sweet spot that you've covered up with shame. And so they don't see this full you, but it's not the fact that the girl is this problem, it's that you refuse to reveal yourself. In a healthy relationship, both parties gradually peel back more layers of the other person. There's something that draws you to them. It's very easy, you have a good connection, and then through that, you gradually begin peeling back layers. And it's this organic building of trust and organic removal of shame. And as you do that in the relationship, if you can do that, a lot of relationships get stuck around the, 2 to 7 year mark because that's when a lot of the shame defense mechanisms they hit the walls and you feel like you can't get there with that person, you want to pull back. But if you can get through that, then what happens is that you start to really see each other for who you are. And there is this really strong sense of being seen. You're being seen comprehensively. You're not being just seen in this one area that you were really ashamed of, that nobody else could notice but her, and so she was special. This woman who's actually healthy is going to see multiple parts of you, and that's real love. You get to real love because it's not just them seeing this shameful part of you in an idealized way. They see you comprehensively and they accept you anyway. And that's the big difference between a healthy relationship and an anima relationship. The anima dynamic is based on this desire for the other person to idealize that which you are ashamed of. And that creates a shame based connection. But a shame based connection also creates tons of dysfunction. So, the key takeaway here is that as you get more comfortable speaking to those parts of yourself that you are ashamed of and dealing with them, you are less likely to fall into any kind of anima pattern with a woman because you are no longer looking for a woman to take on your own shame. And you will be less likely to be willing to take on a woman's shame in exchange for that. Instead, you will see women who are trying to game you and who are looking for you to save them. You're not going to consent to get into those dynamics because what you see is the woman is refusing to deal with her own issues and she's idealizing you. And because you know yourself and accept yourself more comprehensively, you're not going to get flattered into submission. Anyway, heavy topic, I know, but this is the reason that one girl, you still think about her. The the second you deal with your shame, when you start to really integrate it and come to terms with it, you feel like you can actually be yourself and be open with women and get rejected for who you are. The more you lean into that, the less that woman will stay on your mind. But if you keep that part of yourself hidden and you go out and date, she's always gonna be haunting you like a ghost. Because most women are just gonna see you for a regular guy. They're not gonna be able to immediately pinpoint that shame within you and create this sort of unconscious contract. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like it. Please drop a comment. I respond to all comments. And subscribe. And if you want to go more into this stuff, if you have problems getting over an ex and you wanna explore this more deeply on a personal level, the link to work with me is in the description below. Speak to you next time.